My name is Trevor Meeks. I'm a student pastor in Dickson. And if you remember last week, we talked about choosing and how to choose the right friends. This week, we're gonna be talking about leaving the wrong ones. When I was a freshman in college, 18 years old, figuring out the world, I had one goal in my life. Can you guess what that goal was? It was to have as much fun as humanly possible. That was it. My whole world revolved around chasing fun. And this led me to surrounding myself and finding friends who had that same goal in mind. So you can just picture me, 18, running around with this group of guys, and we're just partying, drinking, chasing girls, and just trying to chase down this fun, this goal of fun. And listen, this is church, we can be honest. We had a lot of fun that year. And with that goal in mind, we were like, let's kick this or end this school year off with a bang, and let's go have a ton of fun at the beach. So we booked a trip in Myrtle Beach and took off there. And the first couple of days, our commitment to the goal showed. We partied, we had a lot of fun, and we were just one thing after the next. But on the last night of that trip, everything changed. And I didn't know it at the time, but it would have been a forever change. On the last night, we're back in the condo, partying a little bit, but then we just start to slow down for a minute, and ended up making my way with one of my best friends into one of the back bedrooms where I'm sitting on the floor and he's standing, and we're just talking, and he ends up turning around and just leaving the room for whatever reason, and I'm sitting here alone on the floor. And that was it. I was alone for the first time in what felt like my entire life. And in this moment, I'm just sitting here, and I felt this heavy wave of just nothingness just pass over me. I felt no purpose. I felt no worth, and I was just filled with this emptiness, like all inside here. And in this moment of emptiness, of purposelessness, I just was left with this question, like, is this really how I want to spend my life? Like, is this really what I want to go after? Do I want to live a life of just purposeless? And it was like the next thing that happened, God just met me there. And it was like this rush of memories where God just began to remind me of everything I'd ever learned about him my entire life. Like every single thing that my mom had taught me growing up, every single thing that I'd heard at church when I was growing up. And all of these memories just started to swarm in and just tell me who Jesus is, and tell me that he's here, he loves me. And it was crazy. And then I had this moment of this long overdue prayer of just saying, you know what, Lord, if you really are who you say you are, if you really are, who everyone has told me you are, then I'm gonna follow you, and I'm gonna start going after you, because I don't want to live a meaningless life. And so that sent me in my heart in a brand new direction. But here's the thing, I'm still at this beach trip. We get back in the car the next day and we drive to Virginia, and I realize, I'm like, okay, my heart is just, it's starting to beat for Jesus like crazy. And I start trying to find him in every avenue I can, start to chase him down in every way I can. But the problem is I spent all my time with these guys who their goal in life was to have fun. So I had this huge problem. I gave my life to Jesus, but everything in my life still looked the exact same. So I felt like this crazy tension where I was being torn in two. I had this side of me that was being pulled in towards this friend group of just having fun and all these sins and all these things that we'd already taken place in. And then the other side of me is just pulling at my heart towards Jesus. And I just sat in this tension. And I think a lot of us have felt that tension being pulled between the world and between Jesus. And there's actually a story about Paul in the Bible, and he was sitting in this tension between friends and what God was calling him towards. So hopefully tonight we can answer the question, what do we do when the world is pulling us in one direction and Jesus is pulling us and another. In a minute, you can open your Bible to Acts chapter 15. If you don't have a Bible, that's okay because you can just read it up on the screen. But in this story we're about to read, there's three characters. There's Paul, Barnabas, and John Mark. And you need to know, as a little setup for when this takes place, Paul and Barnabas and Mark are people in the very beginning of the church, of like when the church started to move. So in the New Testament, it starts off with these 4 books we call the Gospels. And those 4 books are all about the life of Jesus, the death of Jesus, and then his resurrection. And then soon after, that's when Acts was written. And it's like the beginning of the church. So when Jesus died on the cross for you and me for forgiveness, then he sent that message with his group of disciples and all these other people, and they began sharing the love of Jesus, sharing the story of Jesus, and that's where we get the start of the church. So that's where we're at. We're right in the beginning of the church, and Paul and Barnabas and all these other guys are starting to spread the story of Jesus. So what you need to know about Paul is he's one of the first church leaders. He's written just a ton of the New Testament, and just one of the greatest Christians of all time, really. And then Barnabas, the second guy, he was known as an encourager. His name literally means encouragement, and he just poured into the church in every way, a huge financial asset to the beginning of the church. And then there's John Mark. And John Mark actually got to watch Jesus do a lot of life, and he's one of the people who wrote one of those first 4 books in the Gospels called Mark. So anyways, we're going to pick up that story in verse 36 in chapter 15. So go ahead and read along with me. Sometime later, Paul said to Barnabas, "Let us go back and visit the believers in all the towns where we preach the word of the Lord, and see how they are doing." Barnabas wanted to take John, also called Mark, with them, but Paul did not think it was wise for him because he had deserted them in Pamphylia and had not continued with them in the work. All right, let's pause there for a second. So right here in the beginning, we have Paul, we have Barnabas, we have John Mark. So Paul and Barnabas had done a lot of ministry together. They had traveled from church to church to church, place to place to place, just pouring into people, telling people about the story of Jesus over and over again. And in Pamphylia, they were with John Mark, who's actually the cousin of Barnabas, and he ended up ditching ship. He didn't stay with them. He ditched the party. And in this space right now, they're thinking about going and doing ministry again to the churches they've already been to encourage them, to build them up, to see like where they're at and all the things. So that's what's happening. Paul doesn't like the idea of this because, like we said, Mark ditched them in the past. So we're going to jump back in verse 39. And it says this. It says, they had a sharp disagreement. This is Paul and Barnabas. Disagreement that they had such a sharp disagreement that they parted company. Barnabas took Mark and sailed for Cyprus, and Paul chose Silas and left, commended by the believers to the grace of the Lord. He went through Syria and Cilicia, strengthening the churches. All right, so we have these 3 guys. They have a disagreement, and they decide to part ways. And here's the thing that's important. Paul was called by God. He had this mission to go and spread the gospel and plant churches and do this thing and encourage churches. Barnabas, same thing. Like God has called him, and they saw it happening differently with John Mark. And so they went their separate ways. And I tell you what, they did a lot of ministry together. Paul and Barnabas did a lot of ministry hand in hand. They were brothers doing things close and close and close. And there was this point where they had to decide, okay, to continue to do ministry the way that God is calling us to, we have to separate and go our ways. And I think what we need to learn from Paul is that it matters who we choose to run beside. And the truth is there is a time to step away from people. See, Paul understood that the people we run with in life influence our ability to grow after what we're made for. There's this, you heard last week where PK shared the quote, "Show me your friends and I'll show you your future." Guys, it's so true. The people we're closest to have the most influence in our lives. The people we spend the most time with end up determining how we spend most of our time. Paul got this and knew that there was way too much room for distraction, disunity, and even desertion if he continued with Barnabas and John Mark. So they made the hard decision to say, we're going to part ways and continue on with the plan and the purpose that God has for our lives. And the thing is as I'm sitting in this tension with my friends and with Jesus, there came a moment where I just had to decide to plant my foot in the ground and pick a side and choose what I wanted. And for me, guys, it was an incredibly hard decision, but the best decision for me was I chose Jesus. I chose a life to go after the bigger purpose that God had for me. And there was huge sacrifices in that. It was a painful season. It was a lonely season. And it was so hard to tear myself from my best friends, these people who I've been doing life with for that entire year. I've gotten so close to, did so much alongside, to tear myself from that, to choose Jesus. It was one of the most sacrificial, hardest things that I did, but I knew I didn't want to live a meaningless life. So I made the sacrifice. And anytime a relationship with another person is broken, it does that. It causes pain, because the reality is you and I, we were created for perfect relationship with people. In the beginning, God created humans perfect, and that means he created relationships perfect. And when sin entered the world and brokenness entered the world, it brought pain into that reality of when relationships and friendships separate. That's why it's so painful. But here's the thing, guys. The joy of finding and running after our God-given purpose so far outweighs the pain of separation. And here's why. Because our purpose, our God-given purpose to live with and to know God, is eternal. It lasts forever. While the pain of suffering, although it doesn't always seem this way, it's only temporary. Listen, it may be time for you to step away from a friend for a while. Listen, I knew these guys who I was running with my life. I knew that they were running the opposite direction of what I wanted. And I had to plant my foot in the ground and make a decision towards Jesus. I had to make a decision of who I wanted to be, which means I needed to know, who do I want to be? And I had to decide to go after that no matter the cost. So maybe for you, maybe it takes you to take a moment and say, you know what, I'm going to plant my foot in the ground and go after what God has for me. Maybe for you, it means that you have to decide and figure out who you want to be, and then go after that, and then go after it no matter what the cost. And here's the thing. Paul had this God-given calling on his life to go after planting the church and all this, and he went after it with relentless pursuit. But what he didn't do is bash John Mark and Barnabas in the process. What he didn't do is go his way and say, yeah, those fools back there, no. They separated ways to a point where later on in the Bible, in 2 Timothy, we see them kind of rejoining together, and it's an awesome thing. So here's the thing: we don't step away from friends with anger, with contempt, with hatred in our hearts for them, only with the fact that we have confidence knowing that running towards God and running with those people can't go hand in hand. They can't go hand in hand. They have to separate. In 1 Peter, there's this beautiful passage, and it kind of gives us how do we live in this space. And it says, finally, all of you should be of one mind, sympathize with each other, love one another as brothers and sisters, be tender-hearted, and keep a humble attitude. Don't repay evil for evil. Don't retaliate insults with insults or those who insult you. Instead, pay them back with a blessing. Here's the thing: because I didn't step away from these guys with anger and hatred towards them, I was actually able to keep in touch with these guys. And no, are they my running partners? No, we're not doing life side by side. That had to break. But because I didn't treat them poorly or with arrogance or bitterness against them or insults in my heart against them, there's actually still a space and still hope for me to be able to share the love of Jesus with them, which is a beautiful thing. So you need to know this. Stepping away from people does not mean we stop loving them. It just means we're choosing to love Jesus more. You never know. God could grab their hearts at any moment too. All right, we'll see you guys next week.